I remember reading this article, it was a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago or so. Somebody gave it to me. It was I think it was in the New Yorker magazine, but it was about, pretty interesting article. It was about the need for prison reform here in the United States, but it was very, very specific. It focused on solitary confinement and how, according to the guy who wrote the article, we have way too many prisons with way too many prisoners who are in solitary confinement for way too long. And this guy really says essentially it's torture. When you separate a person from people in a big way, in a long-term way, it can destroy them, really. And we're doing it too much, way too much, at least according to this article. This is the beginning of what he says. Human beings are social creatures. We're social not just in the trivial sense that we like company, and not just in the obvious sense that we need each other and depend on each other. We're also social in a more fundamental way. Simply to exist as a normal, healthy human being requires interaction with other people. Kind of simple point. We need to be around other people. And he gives a couple of examples that kind of make the point, not even connected to prisons. He talked about this psychologist who I guess kind of made this discovery back in the 1950s. He was studying the relationship between mothers and their newborn babies, and I guess the question was, how much time should they be spending, mothers? What's the right amount of time, the right amount of presence? What's too much? What's not enough? That kind of stuff. So this guy was experimenting. He was using monkeys to learn about human behavior. So what he did was got a whole bunch of these newborn monkeys, and he almost immediately separated them from their mothers. And very quickly he started to see very, very troubling behavior. They were becoming violent, and in some cases withdrawn. Some cases they were just dying. So it was pretty clear, like, take a baby away from its mother and you're going to have trouble. Now, I don't know, that seems like common sense, doesn't it? Like, I think I even remember reading about, I took like an intro to psych class when I was in college. I remember this sounding familiar. But I guess in the 1950s, what the psychologists were saying was, the thought was they were encouraging parents to actually be less affectionate and to be show less attention to your babies. And the thought was that would promote kind of more independence. So kind of distance yourself a bit, and they'll have to they'll become more independent. So what this doctor did was, this is the part that I remembered. Sounds crazy, but he made a doll, looked like a stuffed monkey, I guess. And he gave each one to these baby monkeys who had been separated. And he said the response was kind of like almost immediate. They started to treat this doll like it was their mother. They were at night when they were sleeping, they would pull the doll close to them. They wanted it to be touching it. When they were frightened, they would go running looking for the doll. They said that they even, like, if the choice was to be fed or to spend time with this doll, they were choosing the doll. So anyway, the writer's point was, in this article at the prisons, is this isn't just a baby thing. This is a human thing. When we are isolated and separated from other people, especially important people, but people in general, we suffer. Bad things happen when we live in isolation. If you remember, this guy, his name was Terry Anderson. He was a journalist back in the 80s, and he was kidnapped. He was in Lebanon, and he was held hostage for, I think, 7 years. And he wrote a book about it. Eventually, he was released. But he talked about his experience of being a hostage. And he compared, there were times when he was in solitary confinement, like a tiny, awful, horrible little cell. And then there were times when he was with 3 or 4 other people. And he said he noticed when he was solitary, he said his mind began to deteriorate. He was forgetting things that he never could have imagined forgetting. He was forgetting. So he was losing his memory. He was becoming paranoid. He lost the ability to focus. He had a Bible with him, and he didn't even want to read the Bible. Like, he just couldn't. His mind was sort of crumbling. And then he'd be placed, for whatever the reason, they'd stick him back in a cell with other people. And he said, I don't think it was overnight, but he said you could totally see the difference. He felt it. He knew it. Like his mind was being restored. This is what he said. He said, I would rather have had the worst companion than no companion at all. Like, in other words, nothing was worse than being alone, being isolated, according to this guy. POWs during the Vietnam War. John McCain, this is what he said. He spent 2 years in solitary. It's an awful thing. It crushes your spirit, and it weakens your resistance more effectively than any other form of mistreatment. And this is McCain, coming from a guy who had, when his plane crashed, his 2 arms were broken, and they were never given medical treatment. His leg was broken. And then in the course of his torture, his arm was broken again. And he said the solitary confinement was worse than the physical beatings and the torture. So the point of the article, the whole prison thing, was, listen, if we know that prolonged isolation, is cruel, it's torturous, why are we subjecting so many of our prisoners to solitary confinement? Like, take a troubled person, put them off alone, you're going to make a troubled person worse. Now, and I thought it was kind of fair. They interviewed prison officials, administrators, and they said, listen, yes, but you also got to know that there are certain times when we have to isolate. You get certain just impossible to control people, they're gonna hurt other people. So, of course, sometimes it has to happen. But the complaint was, this is becoming like the norm for way, way too many prisoners. And we're we're destroying these people. There's no way we are rehabilitating them. Listen to this. Isolation changes the way the brain works, often making individuals more impulsive and less able to control themselves. The mental pain of solitary confinement is crippling. Brain studies consistently reveal impairments and abnormalities in people who are denied social interaction. Plainly put, these prisoners are often losing their minds. In 2010, a 16-year-old named Khalif Browder from the Bronx was accused of stealing a backpack. He was sent to Rikers Island to await trial, where he reportedly endured unspeakable violence at the hands of inmates and guards, and spent nearly 2 years in solitary confinement. He was 16, he stole the backpack, and he spent 2 years in solitary confinement. In 2013, he was released, having never stood trial. He completed a successful semester at Bronx Community College, but life was a constant struggle to recover from the trauma of being locked up alone for 23 hours a day for 2 straight years. One Saturday, he committed suicide at home. He was 22 years old. So kind of what's being said is like, or what's sort of a given is forced isolation, prolonged isolation, it destroys people. Now, look at the readings today. Look at this first reading, this Old Testament reading from the book of Leviticus, which was just a book of rules. All the Hebrew rules, the Jewish rules. And look at what it says about isolation. It's sort of almost pro-isolation. Basically telling people how you have to isolate certain people. In this case, I mean, it wasn't for a crazy reason. People who were sick, and they didn't have knowledge of disease the way we do today. So anybody who had leprosy or anything that even looked like leprosy, unclean. Keep your distance. They had to look different. They had to dress different. And they had to be apart from the people. The words they use, I love it. It says they had to live outside the camp. They couldn't come inside the camp. They had to live outside the camp. After all I'm talking about in this article, about the crushing effects of isolation, and now we got religion saying, well, this is how you isolate people. Like, sometimes religion just doesn't get it. Sometimes there's like wrong religion, misunderstood religion. This was wrong. Now, I'm not saying you don't, come on, we're living in the last year, like, hey, we've had to quarantine. We've had to separate ourselves. I'm not saying, ignore science. But this was like, you're out. You are outside the camp. That's the first reading. Now you got the gospel. No coincidence, again, these 2 readings, same day. Jesus basically takes those rules and he flips them upside down. He absolutely throws them out. This isolation stuff, he's like, no. The guy who's the leper, he's breaking the rules too. He's supposed to be keeping his distance. And even when he comes remotely close to somebody, it's supposed to be unclean. Stay away. I'm gross. Don't come near me. And this guy walks right up to Jesus. He breaks the rule. And Jesus goes with it. Jesus doesn't back away. Jesus doesn't tell him to get outside the camp. He heals the guy. He touches the guy. And he's no longer outside the camp. We can't let people live outside the camp. And the examples I gave were pretty serious. Like POWs, of course not. And Rikers Island, atrocious conditions in a horrible place. Okay. I mean, how many of us can relate to that? Not so much. Being kidnapped in Lebanon, I mean, none of us, right? But I don't think this gospel is just about stating the obvious, that mothers and fathers should be with their children, their newborn children. I mean, that's obvious. But you know what I think? We break the spirit of this gospel kind of a lot. Walk into a high school cafeteria, or walk onto a school bus with a bunch of middle schoolers, and you can see the lepers. You can see those kids that are just apart. They're outside the camp. Because, kids we create all these mean, separating rules. You look, you walk, you talk, you drink, you dress different. So you're apart. You're outside the camp. And we don't use those words, but we do the equivalent, don't we? Talk to somebody who spent time when they were a kid outside the camp, and 30 years later they speak about it like it happened yesterday because of the pain of it. That's what that psychologist realized with the monkeys. Or maybe it's this. Maybe it's okay. Oh, well, you're right. You're absolutely right about a cafeteria, but I'm way out of high school. How about at work? Somebody starts their first day of work. Man, am I the person that seeks that guy or girl out? They don't know what they're doing. They don't know where anything is. They clearly look anxious. They're struggling. They're brand new. They're outsiders. Do I invite them in? Do I make it an effort to kind of like seek them out and be like, hey, what can I do for you? This is who I am. You got any questions, come ask me. Don't you love those people? They're the people you remember. And I think that's part of what this gospel is saying. How about somebody who you've thrown out of the camp? Somebody that we've just said, I just can't be bothered anymore. You're done. You're done. They've done something, they've acted in some way, probably more than once, and somewhere along the line we just said, you're outside the camp. You're kind of unclean. I can't deal with you anymore. And come on. Sometimes in the course of life, I think there are circumstances where a relationship is so toxic, it's like, I can't be around this person anymore. This relationship has got to be over. I get it. I'm not talking about that. That's healthy. I'm talking about, people, we all know people who are like, when they decide they're done with a person, like they're dead. Like they don't even consider the possibility of reform, of return. You're finished. Well, you know what? That's not this gospel. It's not Jesus. I don't think we can be comfortable with that. Maybe it's about ourselves, feeling lousy about yourself because of something I've done, I was so not myself and I regret whatever it was. And I kind of think like even God has sort of thrown me outside the camp. No, he hasn't. Does that mean of course there's right and there's wrong. There's a way to live. There's a right way to live, a wrong way to live. Sin is real, and so is judgment. But nobody is outside the camp. This is what President Obama said this a couple of years ago. He was still in office, and he was pushing for reforms with the prisons. He said, in America, we believe in redemption. We believe, in the words of Pope Francis, that every human being is endowed with inalienable dignity. How great is that? I wish he included all people, like unborn people. But let's see what he says. Every human being is endowed with an inalienable dignity, and society can only benefit from the rehabilitation of those convicted of crimes. That was the Pope. That was the president quoting the Pope. Now this is the president. We believe that when people make mistakes, they deserve the opportunity to remake their lives. And if we can give them the hope of a better future and a way to get back on their feet, then we will leave our children with a country that is safer and stronger and worthy of our highest ideals. In other words, this gospel today. For Jesus, there was nobody outside the camp. If there wasn't for him, there can't be for us.